Currently, you have a form that works very nice. As you can see here, it is obtaining or basically requesting the information related with the details of that specific card that we can use. But this has a little problem or a little detail, let's say, because for security and to accomplish the security concerns of Stripe, or basically the global politics related with the security of the information of any payment method, these details should not touch our backend. So you might be wondering, how are we going to charge this card? Well, what we are going to do is use again a lot of JavaScript from the Stripe JavaScript library to obtain a token that represents this payment method, this card, and then we can use that token to create a payment for that. Basically, the Stripe API is not going to accept directly the information of the payment method. It is going to accept a valid token that represents that payment method, but not the payment method itself. So for that, we are going to add some scripts here in our Stripe collapse. So let's go there. We are in our scripts stack, and there we are going to add a new script tag. And we will need to identify two main components: the form that we are sending and the button that the user clicks before to send, or basically to send that form. So we have form, document get element by ID, and the ID of that form is payment form. If you don't remember, in our home we have that specific form where we specify an ID, which is payment form, and the same for the payment button. You can see here we have this is submit and the ID is pay button. So we have this payment form, and we are going to do basically the same for the pay button. So as you can see here, it is pay button as well for the ID. Once we have the button, we are going to add a listener for the click events. So once the user clicks, we are going to execute some set of specific instructions. So this method is going to receive the name of the event, which is going to be click, and the function that is going to be executed. But this is going to be an async function because we are going to use the Stripe library to send a request and obtain asynchronously the result of that payment method, basically the token that represents this payment method. So we have an async function. We need to send the event itself there, and there we have. So inside this, we are going to first prevent to send this form, and then we are going to obtain or the payment method or the error details. So the error details are going to be established in the element that we created as card errors, but we additionally need an element where we are going to store hiddenly the value of that specific token. So let's to add faster an input, which is going to be hidden, and we are going to call this payment method with a similar ID. So we are going to use this input to, once we obtain that specific token to represent the payment method, we are going to establish that specifically there. So going back here, we are going to send that request. So we are going to assign that to an object of JavaScript, which may have the payment method, or basically that token, or a possible error. Now we are going to create a promise to send basically a request using the Stripe create payment method. Now, this method needs to receive several information. The first one is the type of element that we are going to create, and this is going to be card. Then we need to specify the card element where we are taking the information. So we already created that in the previous script, which is card element. And finally, we can specify an object with different options. So in this case, we are going to specify the billing details, which is an object as well. And we are going to identify the username and the email. So we have the name, and we are going to obtain directly from the authenticated user. This is directly from Laravel, of course. So we have the name. And similarly, we are going to have the email. So at this point, we have two possible options. Or we obtained a payment method or we obtained an error. So let's ask first if we obtained an error. So if it is an error, we are going to show that errors in the element for that. So let's obtain that element. Remember, we created that with that specific ID, which is cart errors. And then put a content for this. And from that error, we need to obtain the message. Now, in the case that it is not an error, so we are going to add an else, it means that we are able to obtain the payment method, the identifier specifically, because this is an object. So, what we are going to do is to obtain the element, the hidden input that we just created. And remember, this is payment method. And there we are going to specify the value, which is going to be equals to the payment method object in the ID attribute. Then, finally, after the whole process, we just need to submit the form. Now, there are a little details. Let's comment this first. And the first detail is that we only want to do all this information, create the payment method, send the request, show the errors, if we are on Stripe, if the user clicks on Stripe. But if the user clicks on PayPal or something different, we should not be executing this. So we are going to add a condition at the top asking for if the elements in the form, specifically in the payment platform, the value of that payment platform, which is basically the ID of Stripe or PayPal, is equals to the Stripe one. And remember, we are in a for each here. As you can see here, we are looping in the different payment platforms. And we are showing the component for Stripe only when we are on Stripe. So we can perfectly ask here if this ID is equals to the ID of the current element on that loop. So if that ID is the same, we are going to execute all this code. But if that is not the case, so we are just going to ignore, we are going to send the form without any kind of detail. So that means that we can submit without any kind of problem our form. So let's go now directly to our controller to be able to debug the values that we have there. So let's go to controllers, payment controller, and just after the rules, we are going to add something to obtain all the inputs that we have in the request. And in that way, we are going to be sure if we are receiving that input which is containing the payment method. So let's go back here. Let's refresh. Let's open the console to be sure that we don't have any error. And it looks that we have an error. In fact, it says unexpected identifier on line this. So yeah, of course, I have a typo here. This should say await instead of wait just. So let's put it here. Let's go back, refresh. It looks like it is fine now. So if we click on PayPal and click on Pay, we are obtaining a null payment method, which is pretty good. But if we return and use Stripe using 4242 for the different details here, and send, we are obtaining the payment method with the token that represents that. And we can use that token to basically create a payment and authorize that correspondingly. That is exactly what we are going to see in the following classes after this. See you there.